Montana Territory, 1872. The pale Montana sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Pine as Austin Keller tied his dun gelding to the hitching post outside the general store. The 25-year-old cowboy patted his vest pocket, feeling the single silver dollar that represented the entirety of his worldly wealth. 6 months of backbreaking work on the Bar X Ranch had ended with a handshake and a promise of more work come spring, but winter loomed closer with each passing day. Austin removed his worn Stetson, revealing sandy brown hair in need of a trim. His green eyes, which normally held a ready smile, were clouded with worry lines that had no business on a face so young. He had learned early that the frontier cared nothing for a man's dreams. It took and took until there was nothing left to give. His father had died believing in the promise of the West, leaving Austin alone at 16 with nothing but calloused hands and the harsh lesson that a man survived by keeping to himself and expecting nothing from others. No point in getting attached to anything or anyone. Out here, he muttered to himself, a mantra that had served him well through 9 years of drifting. Just get supplies and move on. The thought of another lonely winter gnawed at him as he stepped into the store, nodding politely to Mrs. Peterson behind the counter. Austin had survived by believing that isolation was safety. Connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got you killed in a land where blizzards, bandits, and broken promises waited around every corner. Yet lately, as he rode endless miles between seasonal ranch jobs, a hollow feeling had taken root in his chest, one that jerks of beef and coffee couldn't fill. What Austin needed most was what terrified him most: belonging. A home that wouldn't be snatched away by nature's cruelty or man's greed. But he had convinced himself that such things were not for men like him, men with empty pockets and nomadic souls. The store bell jingled, drawing Austin's attention to the door where a young woman entered, bringing with her the crisp scent of autumn air. Her dark brown riding dress was simple but well made, her honey blonde hair pinned beneath a modest hat. But it was her eyes, a startling shade of blue, that caught his attention, bright with intelligence and something else he couldn't name. At 22, Victoria Rourke carried herself with the confidence of someone far older. She nodded politely to Mrs. Peterson before turning her attention to the shelf of canned goods, seemingly unaware of the young cowboy's presence. Austin returned to examining a sack of beans, calculating how long they might last if he rationed carefully. The sound of breaking glass followed by a soft cry of dismay drew his attention back to the young woman. A jar of preserves lay shattered at her feet, red jam spreading across the wooden floor. "I am so sorry," she said, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as she crouched down, reaching for the glass shards. "Leave those be, miss," Austin said, moving quickly to her side. "You will cut yourself." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, worn but clean, and began carefully gathering the larger pieces of glass. "Thank you, mister." Her voice was gentle with a hint of Eastern refinement. "Keller. Austin Keller." He concentrated on the task, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "No need for thanks. Anyone would do the same." Mrs. Peterson appeared with a broom, clicking her tongue disapprovingly. "That will be 50 cents for the preserves, Miss Rourke, plus another 15 for the special order books that arrived on yesterday's stage." Victoria reached for her reticule only to find it missing. Alarm flickered across her face. "I must have left my purse in the saddlebag. If you will excuse me, allow me," Austin said before he could think better of it. He reached into his vest and withdrew his last dollar, placing it on the counter. "This should cover it." Victoria's eyes widened. "Sir, I couldn't possibly, please." "It is nothing." Austin replaced his hat, already backing toward the door. "Good day, miss." Outside, he untied his horse with trembling hands. $1 meant the difference between eating for a week and going hungry. What madness had possessed him to give it away to a stranger? Yet something about her eyes, the momentary vulnerability in them, had prompted a recklessness he'd never felt before. "Fool," he muttered to himself, swinging into the saddle. "Next you will be believing in fairy tales." "Mr. Keller, please wait." Victoria Rourke stood on the boardwalk, one gloved hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. She stepped into the street, apparently heedless of the dust gathering on her skirts. "Miss Rourke, there is no need. There is every need," she interrupted, her blue eyes earnest. "I cannot accept your kindness without offering something in return." My ranch is just 3 miles north of town. We are always in need of good hands, especially with winter coming. If you are looking for work, I can promise fair wages and a dry place to sleep." Austin's brow furrowed. "Your ranch? You are hardly more than—" He stopped himself, realizing how rude his observation would sound. A smile quirked the corner of her mouth. "Then a girl? I assure you, Mr. Keller, the running has been mine these past 2 years. My father left it to me when he passed, and I intend to see it prosper." Something in her determined tone reminded Austin uncomfortably of his own father's dreams. He had learned the hard way that dreams died quickly in Montana territory. "I appreciate the offer, but I have plans to head south before the passes fill with snow." The lie came easily to his lips. Victoria studied him for a moment. "The offer stands if your plans change. Ask anyone. They will direct you to the running R." With a nod, she turned and walked to where her sorrel mare was hitched, mounting with the practiced ease of someone born to the saddle. Austin watched her ride away, convinced he would never see her again. The frontier was no place for sentimentality. He would head to the saloon, see if he could earn a few dollars in a card game, then be on his way. 3 days later, Austin huddled beneath a rocky overhang as an early winter storm howled around him. His dun gelding stood miserable and hunched nearby, both of them soaked to the skin. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Austin knew with dreadful certainty that without shelter, neither of them would survive the night. The sound of approaching hoofbeats seemed like a hallucination until a lantern light bobbed through the curtain of snow. A voice called out, somehow carrying over the wind. "Hello, the camp. Anyone there?" Austin struggled to his feet, his fingers numb as he waved. "Here." A figure on horseback materialized from the swirling white, leading a second horse. As they drew closer, Austin recognized Victoria Rourke, bundled in a heavy coat, a scarf wrapped around her face. "Mr. Keller, thank goodness. I feared you might be caught in this." She dismounted in one fluid motion. "When I saw your horse's tracks heading into open country with this storm coming, I thought you might need assistance." Austin stared at her in disbelief. "You followed me? In this weather? No one should face a Montana blizzard alone." She handed him the reins to the second horse. "Mount up. The running is less than an hour's ride. We can make it if we leave now." Pride warred with survival instinct in Austin's chest. "I do not need charity, Miss Rourke." Her blue eyes flashed with impatience. "This is not charity, Mr. Keller. This is how we survive out here, by helping each other. Now, will you stubbornly freeze to death to prove your independence? Or will you accept that sometimes even the strongest among us need assistance?" The storm intensified around them, making the decision for him. 20 minutes later, they rode through the gates of what Austin could barely make out as a substantial ranch compound. Lanterns glowed in the windows of a large main house and several outbuildings. Men emerged from a bunkhouse to take their horses, nodding respectfully to Victoria. "Miss Victoria, we were getting worried," called an older man with a silver mustache. "All is well, Hank. Please see to Mr. Keller's horse. He will be staying with us until the storm passes." She turned to Austin. "Hank Jeffries is my foreman. He keeps things running smoothly." Austin found himself ushered into the warm main house, where a Hispanic woman introduced as Elena pressed a mug of hot coffee into his trembling hands and tutored over his soaked clothing. Before he could protest, he was shown to a small but comfortable bedroom and provided with dry clothes. "Dinner in 30 minutes. Elena informed him cheerfully before closing the door. Austin stood in the center of the room, dripping onto a fine carpet, feeling completely disoriented. The running was clearly prosperous, far more than the small ranch Victoria had implied. The furniture was solid, the linens clean, the windows fitted with actual glass rather than oiled paper. This was no struggling homestead, but a thriving cattle operation. At dinner, Austin learned that Victoria had inherited the running from her father, Robert Rourke, a man who had come west with nothing but determination and built the largest ranch in the territory. What Austin had assumed was naivety in Victoria's manner was actually quiet confidence born of capability. "My father taught me everything about ranching from the time I could walk," she explained as they sat before the fireplace after dinner. "He had no sons, so he said he might as well teach his daughter. When he died, many thought I would sell and return east to my mother's family, but this is my home." Austin nodded. uncomfortable with how easily she shared her story when his own remained locked behind walls of caution. You have built something impressive. We have our challenges, she admitted. Cattle rustlers have grown bolder recently, and there are those who think a woman has no business running a ranch this size. She studied him over the rim of her teacup. What about you, Mr. Keller? What brings you to Montana territory? Austin stared into the fire. Work mostly. I go where there are cattle that need tending. And before that, you speak like a man with education. He shifted uncomfortably. My father was a schoolteacher back east. He came west with dreams of building something like this. He gestured to the comfortable room. Instead, he found an early grave. Taught me that dreams are dangerous things out here. Victoria's expression softened. I am sorry for your loss. When did he pass? 9 years ago. Pneumonia after a hard winter. Austin stood abruptly. Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Rourke. I should turn in. Of course. If she was offended by his sudden withdrawal, she didn't show it. Breakfast is at 6. If you are still looking for work, Mr. Keller, my offer stands. We need good men, especially with these rustlers causing trouble. Austin paused at the door. Everything in him warned against staying, against letting down the barriers that had protected him for so long. And yet, I will consider it. Good night, Miss Rourke. Good night, Mr. Keller. 2 weeks later, Austin found himself still at the Running R, having accepted Victoria's job offer temporarily until he could repay her kindness. The storm had passed, but there was always another task that needed doing. Fences to mend, cattle to move to winter pasture, supplies to haul from town. He learned that Victoria was not merely the owner in name, but worked alongside her men, riding out in all weather, making decisions about breeding stock and negotiating contracts with buyers. Her small hands were calloused from work, her fair skin tanned from long days in the saddle. The ranch hands respected her not out of obligation, but because she had earned it, something Austin found himself doing as well. One evening, as they rode back from checking on a remote line shack, Victoria pointed to a ridge in the distance. That is where I want to expand next spring. The valley beyond has good water and shelter from the north winds. Perfect for calving season. Austin studied the terrain, impressed by her foresight. Your father would be proud. I hope so. Something in her voice made him turn to look at her. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning it to liquid gold. Sometimes I wonder if I am doing right by his legacy. He built all this from nothing. I merely inherited it. That is not true, Austin said firmly, surprising himself with his vehemence. I have seen how you work, how you care for this land and the people who depend on it. That is not merely inheritance. That is stewardship. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and caused a strange tightening in Austin's chest. Thank you, Austin. That means a great deal coming from you. As they rode side by side, Austin realized with growing alarm that his carefully constructed walls were crumbling. Each day at the Running R showed him a different way to live, not in isolation, but in community. Victoria's strength came not from refusing connection, but from embracing it, from building a network of people who worked together against the frontier's hardships. The realization terrified him. Attachment meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant inevitable pain when it all fell apart, as it always did. That night, Austin lay awake, staring at the ceiling and fighting the urge to saddle his horse and disappear into the darkness. The longer he stayed, the harder it would be to leave when the time came, as it surely would. The following week brought trouble in the form of 3 strangers who arrived in Silver Pine asking questions about the Running R. Hank returned from town with the news, his face grim. Miss Victoria, those men are working for James Blackwell. They are not being subtle about it. Victoria's expression tightened at the name. What do they want? They are asking about your cattle operations, supply schedules. Nothing good. Austin, who had been repairing a saddle nearby, looked up. Who is James Blackwell? Victoria and Hank exchanged glances before she answered. A cattle baron from Wyoming. He offered to buy the Running R after my father died. When I refused, he suggested a marriage alliance instead. Her voice hardened. I declined that offer as well. Now he is behind most of the rustling in the territory, Hank added. Never anything that can be traced back to him directly, but everyone knows. Austin felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. What do you plan to do? What we always do, Victoria said, straightening her shoulders. Protect what is ours and continue our work. She turned to Hank. Double the night patrols on the South Range. I do not want any unpleasant surprises. That night, Austin found Victoria on the porch, staring out at the darkened ranch yard. He hesitated before joining her, offering a cup of coffee which she accepted with a grateful smile. You should not worry alone, he said quietly. The men are loyal. They will stand with you against these rustlers. I know, she sighed. It is not just the cattle I worry about. Blackwell is a dangerous man. He does not take rejection well, and he has powerful friends. Austin leaned against the porch railing. Why did you refuse his offer? It would have solved your problems. Victoria's eyes flashed with indignation. Sell my father's legacy? Marry a man who sees me as nothing but a means to acquire more property? She shook her head firmly. I would rather lose everything than live such a life. Her fierce independence both impressed and unsettled him. It reflected something in himself that he had long suppressed, a desire not just to survive, but to stand for something meaningful. I admire your courage, he said softly. Is it courage or stubbornness? She smiled ruefully. My mother would say the latter. Perhaps both, Austin replied, returning her smile. The best qualities often are. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge overhead. Something was changing between them, something that went beyond employer and employee. Austin felt it like a physical presence, both exhilarating and terrifying. 3 days later, the threat materialized. Austin and 2 other hands were moving a small herd of cattle when rifle shots cracked through the morning air. Bullets kicked up dirt near their horses' hooves as 5 masked riders appeared from a nearby gully. This is Blackwell territory now, one shouted. Clear out while you can. Austin signaled to the other hands to take cover as he drew his revolver. More shots exchanged, the cattle scattering in panic. One of the running hands, a young man named Charlie, cried out and fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Outnumbered and with a wounded man, Austin made the difficult decision to withdraw, helping Charlie onto his horse and leading a retreat back toward the ranch. The rustlers made off with nearly 30 head of cattle, a substantial loss with winter approaching. Victoria was waiting in the ranch yard when they returned, her face pale with worry. When she saw Charlie's bloody shirt, she immediately called for Elena to prepare bandages and hot water. What happened? She demanded as Austin dismounted. He explained the ambush, watching her expression shift from concern to anger to resolution. I need to report this to the sheriff, she said firmly. And then we need to prepare? This was only their opening move. Austin caught her arm as she turned to leave. Victoria, these men are killers. They will not hesitate to harm you if you stand in their way. Her blue eyes met his, unwavering. I know the risks, Austin. But this is my home, my responsibility. I will not be driven off my land by threats. Later that evening, after the doctor had seen to Charlie, Austin found Victoria in her father's study, poring over maps of the ranch boundaries. Without looking up, she said, the sheriff promises to investigate, but we both know he is unlikely to find anything. Austin took a seat across from her. Then we need to prepare to defend ourselves. She nodded, pushing a strand of honey blonde hair behind her ear. I have been thinking the same. We will move the remaining herds closer to the ranch house, increase patrols, and make sure everyone is armed. Victoria, his use of her first name, still rare despite weeks at the ranch, made her look up. Why do you trust me with this? You barely know me. A small smile touched her lips. I know enough. A man who would give his last dollar to help a stranger is not a man who runs when things get difficult. Her faith in him was both humbling and frightening. Austin had spent 9 years believing that trust was a liability in the West. Yet here was a woman who had built her entire life around trusting others and being trustworthy in return. For the next week, tension hung over the running like storm clouds. The men worked in pairs, always armed, watching the horizons for trouble. Austin rarely left Victoria's side, accompanying her on necessary rides around the property, standing guard as she conducted business. One evening, as they returned from checking fence lines, Victoria reined her horse to a stop at the top of a rise overlooking the ranch. The setting sun bathed the buildings in golden light, the windows of the main house gleaming like fire. My father used to bring me here when I was a child, she said softly. He would point to everything he had built and tell me that someday it would all be mine to protect and nurture. She turned to Austin, her expression serious. He never taught me to fear the responsibility, only to respect it. Austin gazed at the peaceful scene below, trying to imagine growing up with such certainty of purpose. You honor him with your courage. As do you, Austin. When he looked at her questioningly, she continued, Your father had dreams for this land too. Perhaps in defending the running R, you honor the hope that brought him west. Her words penetrated the armor around his heart, touching something long buried. Before he could respond, a distant plume of smoke caught his eye, rising from the direction of the ranch's northern pasture. Fire! He shouted, already turning his horse. They are firing the winter grass. They raced toward the smoke, soon joined by other ranch hands responding to the alarm. By the time they reached the pasture, flames were spreading rapidly through the dry grass, driven by the wind toward a stand of timber that separated the pasture from the main ranch. If it reaches those trees, we will lose the whole North Range, Victoria shouted over the crackling flames. Austin, take 4 men and start a backfire from that ridge. Hank, get the others with shovels to dig a fire break here. For hours they battled the blaze, faces blackened with soot, lungs burning from smoke. Austin worked alongside men he had come to respect, following Victoria's clear commands without question. When a burning branch fell dangerously close to her, he pulled her to safety without thinking, his arms closing protectively around her for just a moment before they both returned to the fight. It was past midnight when they finally contained the fire. Exhausted, they gathered by the creek to wash soot from their faces and take stock. The damage was severe but not catastrophic. They had saved the timber stand and most of the winter grazing land. This was deliberate, Hank said, his voice rough from smoke. Found tracks of at least 3 riders heading east. Victoria nodded grimly, accepting a canteen from Austin. Her face was streaked with soot, her clothing singed, yet she maintained the calm authority that had guided them through the crisis. They are testing us, she said, seeing how we respond, looking for weakness. Austin studied the determination in her eyes and realized something fundamental had shifted within him. The running was no longer simply a place of temporary employment. It had become something worth fighting for. And the woman beside him, with ash in her golden hair and resolve in her blue eyes, had become someone he could not bear to lose. The next morning, a letter arrived from James Blackwell. The messenger, a nervous young man with a Blackwell Ranch brand on his saddle, handed it to Victoria on the porch and quickly departed. Austin watched her face grow pale as she read, her fingers tightening on the paper. What does it say? He asked quietly. She handed him the letter, her mouth set in a firm line. He offers his protection against the unfortunate troubles we have been experiencing. All I need do is accept his marriage proposal. Austin scanned the elegantly penned threats disguised as concern, fury building in his chest. He all but admits he is behind the attacks, while ensuring there is nothing that could be used against him legally. Victoria took back the letter, folding it precisely. He gives me 1 week to reconsider my options before the situation deteriorates further. What will you do? She met his gaze steadily. What I have always done. Protect what is mine. That evening, Victoria called all the ranch hands together in the main house. Standing before the fireplace, she laid out the situation with unflinching honesty. I will not surrender the running R, not to Blackwell or anyone else. But I cannot ask you to risk your lives in this fight. Any man who wishes to leave with full pay and my gratitude may do so now. A moment of silence followed her words. Then Hank stepped forward. Miss Victoria, my father worked for your father. This land is as much my home as it is yours. I am staying. One by one, the other hands voiced similar sentiments. Austin, standing at the back of the room, felt a tightness in his throat as he witnessed their loyalty. These were men who understood what Victoria had shown him, that the frontier's harshness was best faced together, not alone. Later, as the ranch settled into an uneasy night, Austin found Victoria in her study again, a glass of whiskey untouched before her. I could have 20 good men riding for the running R, and it still might not be enough, she said without preamble. Blackwell has resources we cannot match. Austin took the seat across from her desk. Then we need to be smarter, not just stronger. She looked up, a question in her eyes. Blackwell is used to bullying his way to what he wants, Austin continued. Men like that have predictable patterns. We need to make him think he is winning, then turn his confidence against him. A spark of interest lit her face. What do you have in mind? For the next hour, they developed a strategy. Rather than defending everywhere at once, they would create the illusion of weakness in specific areas while setting traps. They would spread word in town that the running was struggling, that Victoria was considering Blackwell's offer. He will send men to push his advantage, Austin explained. When he does, we will be waiting with the sheriff and witnesses. It is risky, Victoria said, but determination had replaced defeat in her eyes. Yes, Austin agreed. But so is living. Their fingers brushed across the desk as they both reached for the map, and neither pulled away. For a long moment, they remained connected by that small touch, something unspoken passing between them. Why are you doing this, Austin? Victoria asked softly. You could have moved on weeks ago. He searched for words to explain what he barely understood himself. I spent 9 years believing that attachment was weakness, that the only way to survive out here was alone. His fingers tightened around hers. You showed me a different way, a better way. Her blue eyes held his, searching for something. And when this is over, will you move on then? The question laid bare the fear that still lingered within him, the deep-seated belief that happiness was temporary, that to love was to invite devastation. But looking at Victoria, at her strength and vulnerability mingled together, Austin found his answer. Not unless you ask me to, he said quietly. The plan was set in motion the next day. Hank spread carefully crafted rumors in town about Victoria considering Blackwell's offer. Austin and the most trusted hands prepared ambush points at likely targets, coordinating with the reluctant but duty-bound sheriff. 3 days later, their preparations were tested. Austin and Victoria were returning from town when they spotted fresh tracks heading toward the running R's east boundary, an area they had deliberately left lightly guarded. 6 riders, Austin noted, studying the ground, heading for the east pasture. Victoria's expression hardened. Where we moved the prime breeding stock this morning. They rode quickly back to the ranch, gathering Hank and 5 others before heading toward the east pasture. As they crested a hill, they saw exactly what they had anticipated, Blackwell's men cutting out select cattle from the herd. Right on schedule, Austin murmured. He signaled to the others, and they separated, circling to cut off the rustlers' escape routes. The ensuing confrontation was brief but violent. Surprised by the coordinated response, the rustlers found themselves surrounded, with the sheriff and 2 deputies appearing from concealed positions. 2 of Blackwell's men were wounded in the exchange of gunfire, and one of the running hands took a bullet to the leg, but ultimately all 6 rustlers were captured. This is just the beginning, snarled the leader of Blackwell's men as the sheriff bound his hands. The boss will not take this lying down. Tell your boss, Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly across the pasture, that the running is not for sale. Not now, not ever. The victory was significant but incomplete. As Victoria had predicted, Blackwell would not accept defeat easily. That night, as they celebrated the successful defense, Austin found himself increasingly concerned about Victoria's safety. The captured rustlers had revealed under questioning that Blackwell had offered a substantial reward to anyone who could convince Victoria to sell, by any means necessary. You should consider leaving the ranch until this is resolved, Austin suggested as they walked along the moonlit porch after the others had retired. Stay with friends in town, perhaps. Victoria shook her head firmly. I will not be driven from my home, Austin. If I run now, I will never stop running. He recognized the steel in her voice and knew further argument was useless. Instead, he asked, then what is our next move? Blackwell himself, she said decisively. These men are merely symptoms. We need to address the cause. Before Austin could respond, a shot cracked through the night air. Victoria gasped, clutching her arm as blood bloomed on her sleeve. Austin reacted instantly, pulling her down behind the porch railing as another bullet splintered the wood above them. Victoria. Fear made his voice harsh as he examined her arm in the dim light. The bullet had only grazed her, but the attack confirmed his worst fears. Can you move? She nodded, her face pale but determined. Austin drew his revolver and, keeping low, guided her toward the door. More shots rang out from the darkness beyond the ranch yard. Inside, the house erupted into controlled chaos as the hands grabbed weapons and took defensive positions. Elena hurried Victoria to the kitchen to bandage her wound despite her protests that she was fine. Sniper in the north stand of trees, Austin informed Hank. At least one, possibly more. The older man nodded grimly. I will organize the defense. You stay with Miss Victoria. Austin found her in the kitchen, arguing with Elena about the necessity of remaining still while her wound was bandaged. When she saw him, relief flooded her face. Is anyone else hurt? No. He knelt beside her chair, examining the bandage Elena was securing. But this changes everything, Victoria. They are no longer just after your cattle. They are after you. Her blue eyes met his, steady despite the pain. I know, and I will not hide while others fight my battles. This is not about courage, Austin insisted. This is about strategy. Blackwell wants you vulnerable and exposed. We need to turn that against him. A considering look crossed her face. What do you suggest? By dawn, a plan had formed. Word would be spread that Victoria had been seriously wounded in the attack and was being taken to Helena for medical treatment. In reality, she and Austin would make a more dangerous journey, directly to Blackwell's ranch in Wyoming territory. He will not expect a direct confrontation, Austin explained to a skeptical Hank, especially not from a wounded woman. That surprise is our advantage. It is too dangerous, the foreman protested. If you are caught on Blackwell land, we will not be caught, Victoria interrupted. Her arm was in a sling, her face pale but determined. And we will not be alone. Austin has sent telegrams to the territorial marshal and to cattle association representatives in Cheyenne. They will meet us near Blackwell's ranch. Hank looked unconvinced but nodded reluctantly. The men and I will hold the running R. Just promise me you will be careful, Miss Victoria. 2 days later, Austin and Victoria rode south, traveling light and fast. Victoria's wound pained her, but she refused to slow their pace, understanding the importance of timing. They avoided main trails, making camp in secluded spots and keeping watch in shifts. On their second night, sheltered in a small canyon, Victoria sat beside Austin near their small, concealed fire. The flickering light illuminated the planes of his face, the worry lines around his green eyes. You should rest, he said, noticing her gaze. We have a long ride tomorrow. I was just thinking how much has changed, she replied softly. 6 weeks ago, you gave me your last dollar in that general store. Now you are risking your life for my ranch. Austin smiled faintly. Not just for the ranch. The simple admission hung between them in the cool night air. Victoria reached out, her uninjured hand finding his in the darkness. Austin, if something happens, nothing will happen, he interrupted firmly. But if it does, she persisted, I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing that has happened to me since my father died. You reminded me that strength does not mean standing alone. Austin's throat tightened. For so long he had equated connection with weakness, vulnerability with danger. Yet here in the wilderness, hunted by enemies, he had never felt stronger or more certain. You changed everything for me, he said quietly. I thought I knew how to survive out here, but you showed me how to live. Their eyes held in the firelight, and Austin leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Victoria met him halfway, her lips touching his with gentle certainty. The kiss deepened, carrying 9 years of Austin's loneliness away like leaves in a swift current. When they finally parted, Victoria rested her forehead against his. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. They reached the rendezvous point near Blackwell's ranch the following evening. The territorial marshal, a grizzled man named Drummond, waited with 2 deputies and a representative from the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association named Harrington. Miss Rourke, Marshal Drummond greeted her. Your telegram was concerning, but unfortunately not surprising. Blackwell has been suspected in similar operations across 2 territories, but no one has been willing to testify against him. We have signed statements from the men we captured, Victoria said, handing over a packet of documents, and evidence linking them directly to Blackwell. Harrington examined the papers with interest. This is compelling, Miss Rourke. The association has been concerned about Blackwell's methods for some time. What exactly is your plan? Drummond asked, looking between Victoria and Austin. Confrontation, Austin replied. With witnesses. Blackwell believes Victoria is injured and heading to Helena. He will not expect her to appear at his door with law enforcement and association representatives. Risky, the marshal observed. But it might just work. Surprise has a way of making men reveal their true colors. The next morning, their small party rode openly toward Blackwell's sprawling ranch house. Ranch hands stopped their work to stare as the unusual procession approached, some running toward the main house to alert their employer. James Blackwell emerged onto his porch as they dismounted in the yard. He was a large man in his 40s, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that widened in surprise at the sight of Victoria. "Miss Rourke," he recovered quickly, his tone falsely cordial. "This is unexpected. I heard you had been injured in an unfortunate incident." "Not as severely as you hoped, Mr. Blackwell," Victoria replied evenly, her injured arm still in its sling. "And not severely enough to prevent me from addressing the source of these unfortunate incidents." Blackwell's gaze shifted to the marshal and the association representative, his expression hardening. "Whatever accusations you have come to make, I suggest you consider them carefully. Slander is a serious offense." Marshal Drummond stepped forward. "We have sworn statements from men in custody linking you directly to cattle rustling and attempted murder, Mr. Blackwell. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association has authorized an investigation into your operations." For a moment, Blackwell's mask of civility slipped, revealing the rage beneath. His hand moved toward his jacket, but Austin was faster, his revolver appearing as if by magic. "I would reconsider that, Blackwell," he said quietly. What followed was not the violent confrontation they had prepared for, but something more civilized and ultimately more complete. With witnesses present, Blackwell was served with official notice of investigation. His property would be searched, his records examined, his men questioned. "You cannot prove anything," Blackwell snarled as the marshal's deputies began their work. "Perhaps not," Victoria agreed. "But your reputation will not survive the scrutiny. The association members will know what you have done. No one will sell to you, buy from you, or work with you once the truth is known." The look of cold calculation on Blackwell's face told Austin that Victoria had judged correctly. For men like Blackwell, reputation and standing were everything. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. "A signed agreement." Victoria responded without hesitation. "You will cease all operations in Montana Territory. You will stay away from the Running R and all its employees. In return, we will limit our accusations to the current incidents, not pursue investigations of your past activities." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse? Then we will use every resource at our disposal to ensure you face the full consequences of your actions," Austin said. "However long it takes." 3 hours later, they rode away from Blackwell Ranch with a signed, witnessed agreement in Victoria's saddlebag. The marshal remained behind to complete the investigation, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. "He will honor it," Harrington assured them as they parted ways. "He has too much to lose if he does not. The association will be watching him closely from now on." As they turned their horses northward toward home, Victoria's face reflected not triumph but thoughtful relief. "I keep thinking of my father," she said as they rode side by side. "He always said that the true measure of success was not in defeating your enemies, but in standing firmly for what is right." Austin studied her profile against the golden afternoon light. "He would be proud of you today." "Of us," she corrected gently. "I could not have done this alone." The realization that had been growing in Austin's heart these past weeks crystallized into certainty. His father had come west seeking a place to belong, a community to build. Austin had spent 9 years believing that dream had died with him, that safety lay only in isolation. Victoria Rourke had shown him the truth, that the frontier's harshness was precisely why connections mattered, why community was not weakness but strength. They returned to the Running R to find the ranch peaceful, the men relieved at their safe return and the news of their success. That evening, after the celebrations had quieted, Austin found Victoria on the porch, looking out at the stars as she had so many nights before. "What happens now?" he asked, joining her at the railing. She turned to face him, her blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "That depends on you, Austin. The Running R needs a good foreman. Hank has been talking about retiring for years." "Are you offering me a job, Miss Rourke?" he asked, a smile playing at his lips. "I am offering you a home," she replied simply. "If you want it." Austin took her hands in his heart fuller than he had ever believed possible. "I spent 9 years running from attachments, convinced that caring for anyone or anything would only lead to pain." He touched her cheek gently. "You showed me that some things are worth the risk. Is that a yes?" Victoria asked, her voice soft with hope. "It is more than that," Austin said, drawing her closer. "It is a promise. I love you, Victoria Rourke. I think I have since you tracked me through that blizzard, too stubborn to let a stranger freeze to death." Her laugh was like music in the cool evening air. "I believe I loved you from the moment you gave me your last dollar without a second thought." Their kiss beneath the Montana stars sealed a truth Austin had spent years denying. That love was not a liability on the frontier, but its greatest strength. Spring came to the running are with new calves dotting the green pastures and wildflowers blooming on the hillsides. Victoria stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Austin directed the morning's work in the yard below. The past months had brought challenges, winter storms, difficult calving, the occasional reminder that the frontier was unforgiving, but they had faced them together. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully as Austin walked past, his authority as foreman well established. He had brought new ideas to the running irrigation techniques from Texas, breeding methods from back east, and Victoria had implemented them eagerly. Together, they were building something even stronger than what her father had created. As Austin mounted the porch steps, Victoria's heart still quickened at the sight of him. The haunted look that had shadowed his green eyes when they first met had been replaced by quiet contentment. "The south pasture is ready for the new herd," he reported, removing his hat. "And the branding crew is making good progress." Victoria nodded, but her mind was on the small box hidden in her desk drawer, the ring that had belonged to her mother, sent from Boston when Victoria had written of her engagement. "I have been thinking," she said, taking his hand, "about our wedding next month." "Having second thoughts?" Austin asked, though his smile said he knew better. "Never," she assured him. "But I was wondering if we might build something new, just beyond that ridge." She pointed to the eastern edge of the ranch yard. "A place that is ours, not just my father's legacy or your responsibility as foreman. Something we create together." Austin's expression softened as he understood what she was offering. Not just marriage, but true partnership, a joining of dreams rather than one subsumed by the other. "I would like that," he said, drawing her into his arms. "A home of our own making." As they stood together, looking out over the land that had brought them together, Austin reflected on the journey that had led him here. 9 years of believing the frontier allowed no room for love or connection. 9 years of surviving rather than living. One silver dollar, his last, had changed everything. "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Austin smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That some investments yield returns beyond imagining." In the distance, the running cattle grazed peacefully beneath the vast Montana sky, and the future stretched before them, not as something to fear, but as something to build together, one day at a time.